So, if you were put in charge of stabilizing the economy, preventing a crash or taming inflation, what lever would you pull first?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Would you go for, say, the huge power of government taxing and spending? That's your fiscal policy.
Or do you rely almost exclusively on manipulating the money supply and credit, the central bank's job, monetary policy?
And this isn't just some dusty old textbook debate. I mean, this conflict really defined 20th century economics.
Oh, absolutely. And it still shapes every single budget and every Fed decision that gets made today. We're going to take you back to what was like the definitive showdown on this, a public debate in 1968 at NYU.
Yeah, and we've got the sources right here from that legendary confrontation. We've got the foremost advocate of neo-Keynesianism, Walter W. Heller,
Facing off against the leading voice for the monetarist school, Milton Friedman.
These guys were described as two well-known apostles of economics with widely divergent viewpoints, and they were meeting at this really pivotal time.
The whole thing was framed as a confrontation between discretionary versus automated policy.
So our mission today is to unpack their core arguments. I mean, does only money matter?
And is fiscal policy really just, as Friedman famously put it, fiscal tiddlywinks? And maybe the biggest question, should we trust flexible human policymakers or just, rigid automated rules?
Okay, let's start with Walter W. Heller. He was defending what was called the new economics of the 1960s. He gets up on stage, and right away he frames the issue.
Right, he says it's not about whether money matters. He totally concedes that it does.
The real question is whether only money matters much.
Precisely. Heller's whole philosophy is built on finding the right policy mix. He points out that the architects of the new economics were constantly adjusting both levers, monetary and fiscal, together.
Like with the 1964 tax cuts.
Exactly. He says they were terrified that if the Fed got too tight with money, it would just completely cancel out the boost they're expecting from those massive tax cuts. You just can't look at the tools in isolation.
And he immediately goes on the attack, laying out what he called the 8 doubts about, letting the money supply be the one and only guide. Let's start with what he calls the indicator problem. If the money supply is the all-important gauge, well, which gauge are we supposed to be looking at?
That's his first big shot. He's saying, look, should we be guided by M1, that's narrow money, so currency plus checking accounts?
Or M2, which adds in savings accounts.
Or even the monetary base. And Heller, he pulls out internal Fed data showing that sometimes these things just pointed in wildly different directions.
Yeah, he uses 1968 as a perfect example. He says, look, M1 was slowing down, M2 was speeding up, and the monetary base was basically flat.
And he asks the audience which monetary aggregate may be currently most meaningful.
It's a great question. If the road signs are all contradictory, how can you possibly know which way to steer?
Okay, so his second doubt is about confusing the quantity of money with its price.
Right. Heller argues you can't really know if money is scarce without looking at its price, which is the interest rate, the price of credit. And he has these two fantastic historical examples.
Yeah, the first one, 1948. By the money supply measure alone, it looked like the tightest money period on record.
But
Treasury bills were yielding just 1%. That doesn't sound very tight.
okay, and the second one?
1967. This looked like a year of really easy money if you just looked at M1 and M2. But interest rates actually shot up.
Why?
Because everyone was scrambling for cash after this big credit crunch in 1966. So his point is simple. If the quantity says the tap is wide open, but the price says it's nearly shut, which one do you believe?
He's basically saying that looking only at the money stock is, it's misleading without also looking at interest rates.
Exactly.
Then he gets to the velocity problem. This is a huge one.
And he uses it to argue that other things, like fiscal policy, must be having an effect.
So velocity is just how fast money changes hands, right? How many times a single dollar gets spent in a year?
Right, and the whole monetarist theory kind of depends on it being stable, but it wasn't.
It wasn't stable at all.
Not even close. Heller showed that income velocity went up by about 28% between 1960 and 1968.
And if it had been constant?
Well, if velocity hadn't changed since 1960, nominal GNP in 68 would have been $675 billion.
But the actual number was $860 billion.
Yeah, that $185 billion gap, that's the ghost in the machine. That's all the non-monetary stuff, which Heller says is mostly fiscal policy, pushing the economy forward.
He also attacks the idea of long and highly variable lags. something Friedman himself had identified.
Which is a brilliant move, using your opponent's own research against them.
So Friedman found the average lag between a change in money supply and its effect on the economy was 12 to 16 months.
But, and this is the key, the variability was insane. It ranged from 6 months to, 29 months at the peaks?
And Haller pounces on this with a great car analogy.
Oh, I love this one.
He says, look, if I told you a car takes anywhere from 100 to 300 feet to stop, you wouldn't be surprised.
You just say, well, yeah, it depends on whether the road is dry, concrete, or wet ice.
Exactly. So Heller's conclusion is that the monetarist model has to be incomplete.
If they just included other factors, like tax changes, in their equations, the lag wouldn't seem so random. The variability itself is proof that money isn't the only thing going on.
And all this technical stuff leads him to his big philosophical defense of discretion.
Of human judgment.
Yeah. He says since the economy is complex and the lags are variable, you need speed and precision. You need human discretion, not some rigid formula.
And for his ultimate proof, he brings up the 1964 tax cut.
This is a huge one. He argued the economy was being held back by this crushing weight of a massive full employment surplus, $12 to $13 billion.
So why is a surplus crushing? I mean, that sounds good, right?
You'd think so,
Yeah.
but think of it as fiscal drag. As the economy grows, people make more money and automatically pay more taxes. That creates a budget surplus that acts like a vacuum, sucking too much demand out of the private economy and stopping the recovery in its tracks.
So the economy is trying to run, but the tax code is automatically hitting the brakes.
Precisely. And the '64 tax cut was a deliberate choice to take that foot off the brake. And the result? Consumption spending jumps dramatically. For Heller, that was case closed. Fiscal policy works.
So if Heller's whole case is that monetary policy is being oversold,
Friedman gets up and argues just as forcefully that fiscal policy has been oversold.
and he starts by clarifying something really important. He says, look, money matters a lot for nominal things like dollar income and prices.
But not so much for real output over the long run.
Right. It's a crucial distinction. He's saying monetary policy can decide the price tag on everything, but it can't create the actual goods and services. That depends on technology and labor, not how many zeros you print on a bill.
And this is where he challenges Heller directly. He says, okay, the government's budget matters for who spends the money, government or private citizens.
And it affects interest rates, sure.
But, he asserts, the state of the budget by itself, if you hold monetary policy constant, has no significant effect on nominal income or inflation.
And this is the theoretical core of why he calls it fiscal tiddlywinks. Let's walk through the mechanism.
Okay.
Imagine the government decides to create a $10 billion surplus by raising taxes by $10 billion. The Keynesian model says, well, that's a huge contraction.
Because people have less money to spend.
Right. But Friedman says, wait a minute. If the government has a $10 billion surplus, it now needs to borrow $10 million less from the capital markets.
Ah, okay. So the people who would have loaned that money to the government.
The bond buyers now have an extra $10 billion available for private investment. The supply of loanable funds just went up.
And since the government isn't borrowing, interest rates fall, and private companies borrow that $10 billion instead.
Exactly. The $10 billion drop in consumption is offset by a $10 billion rise in investment. To a first approximation, it's a wash. The net effect on total spending is zero.
And he says the belief that fiscal policy works is based on no evidence whatsoever. It's just pure assumption.
And then he brings out his own empirical evidence, the big one being the 1966-67 controlled experiments.
This is a great example.
It really is. In early 66, the Fed slams on the monetary brakes. Money supply growth just slows way down.
But at the same time, the government budget was moving toward a larger deficit.
Which is massive fiscal stimulus.
So you have two completely opposite predictions. Monetary theory says slow down, fiscal theory says boom.
And what actually happened?
The economy slowed down significantly in early 1967.
Just like monetary theory predicted, and in direct contradiction to what fiscal theory predicted, Friedman held this up as, powerful real-world proof.
But this is what's so fascinating, because Heller doesn't really dispute the facts of the slowdown.
No, he disputes the model. He argues that the big, complex econometric models, like the Federal Reserve MIT model, were testing these things.
And he says those models, which have hundreds of equations, show that fiscal policy does matter. That Friedman's simple model is just, well, too simple.
But Friedman has to respond to Heller's earlier technical points. What about the one on interest rates?
Right, that interest rates are a better guide than the money supply. Friedman says, no, Heller's confusing two different concepts.
He clarifies that the interest rate is the price of credit. It's supply and demand for loans.
But the price of money.
The price of money is the inverse of the price level. It's what a dollar can actually buy.
Friedman admits that printing more money initially lowers interest rates for, say, 6 months.
But then inflation expectations kick in. Lenders start demanding higher interest rates to protect themselves, which is why countries with high inflation also have sky-high interest rates. The relationship is just too unstable to use for policy.
Okay, but what about Heller's point about M1 and M2 giving different signals? Friedman's explanation here is a fantastic piece of central banking history.
It really is. He says, look, M1 and M2 usually move together. The only time they get out of whack and introduce all the noise into the system is because of a specific mistake by the Fed.
Regulation Q.
Regulation Q.
Right.
It was a rule that put a ceiling on the interest rates banks could pay on time deposits, which are part of M2.
So when market interest rates went above that ceiling,
Money flooded out of those bank accounts and into other things like commercial paper that paid more.
so the Fed's own rule was making M2 look like it was shrinking even when it wasn't really.
Precisely. Friedman uses this to say, see, the problem isn't the theory. It's the Fed's clumsy attempts at discretionary control that distort the data. Abolish Regulation Q, he says, and the problem goes away.
Which brings us right back to the great philosophical divide.
Yeah.
Rules versus discretion.
Right. Friedman defends a fixed rule like a constant rate of money growth, not because money is literally all that matters.
But because human discretion has historically led to absolute catastrophes.
He points directly at the 1930s, when the Fed, using its discretion, allowed the money stock to collapse, making the Great Depression so much worse.
He sees the economy as having this powerful automatic pilot, the price system.
But for that pilot to work, it needs a basic, stable monetary framework. A fixed rule provides that stability and predictability.
That's where he delivers that famous line. The Chicago School believes that to err is human and to live by rules is divine.
Yeah, the human element just introduces error and political pressure.
But Heller sees a world full of imperfections. Rigid wages, rigid prices. For him, locking policy into a formula in that kind of world could be incredibly destabilizing.
For Heller, progress is about working out the best combination of policies, always adapting to new evidence.
And their view of the post-World War II stability is so different. Friedman says we just got better at avoiding huge monetary mistakes, like severe deflation.
He thinks the Fed has just been less destructive, whereas Heller credits the stability to the positive virtue of active, smart management.
And that's the divide they never really crossed in 1968. It's the same tension that exists right now every time the Fed makes a move or Congress passes a spending bill.
So the outcome of this whole debate really shapes how we think about managing the economy today. For you, the listener, I think the biggest takeaway is this central tension over measurement uncertainty.
Yeah, if you concede Heller's points that the lags are variable, that the indicators can disagree, that the models are impossibly complex, then uncertainty is just a permanent feature of economic policy. And that leaves you with the provocative thought that was kind of left hanging in the air back in 1968.
Which is?
Given all this complexity and all this disagreement over how to even measure the economy, does the simple, stable rule, a predictable fixed monetary growth rate, ultimately become the safest choice? Not because it's perfect, but just because it eliminates the huge risk of human error in all that fine-tuning.